Good morning again, everybody. The Bible readings we'll look at today, we'll just look at three Bible sections. And what you'll see is that each of them is kind of talking about a storm. And the first one is the one that sets the tone for today. The last one is the one we'll go into a little more detail about. So the first one is this section from the book of Mark. If you want to follow along with the Bible readings, there's a Bible reading sheet that you'll be able to find on the website that has today's service Bible sections in it. And this is an account from Jesus living in the Middle East in the Holy Land. And one of the biggest geographical features of the Holy Land is this huge lake, Lake Galilee. Most of the men that Jesus picked to train were guys who were fished for a living on the lake. They tried to catch way more fish than they personally needed so that they could sell them and make a living for their family. So Jesus was on the other side of the lake with his guys, and that's when this account started up. So it's in Mark chapter 4, and we're starting at verse 35. It says, that evening, Jesus told the men he was training, let's go across the lake. So they left the crowd, and his men started across the lake with him in the boat. And some other boats followed along. And a violent windstorm blew in. If you look at the other accounts in Matthew and Luke, you'll see the word it uses for this is the same word it uses for an earthquake. So this was not a little storm that just would blow over. This was the equivalent of an earthquake on this gigantic lake. Most of the time on this lake, you can't even see the shore, so they call it a sea. They call it the Sea of Galilee. Well, verse 37 says, a violent windstorm blew in, and high waves were breaking into the boat, and it was filling up quickly. Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Now, when water's breaking into the boat and the boat's about to go under, that means your cushion's getting wet that you have your head on. Nothing would wake Jesus up. But these guys were in fear of their lives. And so the Bible says they woke him up. Teacher, they shouted, don't you care? We're all going to drown. Then Jesus got up. He ordered the wind to pipe down. He told the water, quiet, settle down. And so the wind stopped. The huge lake instantly calmed down. He asked, why do you all act like such cowards? Don't you have any faith in God's promises yet? What he means is God had promised that Jesus came on earth on a mission to rescue all people, no matter when in history, even today, all the people, whoever will live. And he hadn't done that yet. And so his friends could have thought, God's not going to let us die because Jesus hasn't done what he said he would do, what God planned for him to do. And we haven't done what we're supposed to do, is to spread his message all over the world. And verse 41, the last paragraph there says, now these guys were even more afraid. Who in the world, they said, is this? Even hurricanes and typhoons do what he says. So you can see that it was not about these other guys and what they were doing for God. And you could see it's what Jesus was doing in the place as the substitute for all human beings, even here when he controls his own emotions. He's doing a service to us by earning us credit for always being calm, no matter what the situation we face is. That takes us to the next section. And we always try to do a Bible section from the Old Testament Bible too. And so this is Job 38. Job is in the middle of the Bible. You can follow along again with the section as it's printed out on the church's website, or if you want to use your own paper Bible or some sort of online resource, fine. The book of Job has got 42 chapters in it, so it's a fairly big book, and most of the book is Job talking about how mad he is that God let his whole family die except for him and his wife. In one day, they all died. In one day, in addition, Job lost everything that he had. All of his income was gone. All of his farm implements were gone. All of his livestock were gone. He spends a lot of time in the book explaining how he doesn't know why God would let this happen. And friends that came to mourn with him and try to comfort him, they were also really confused. They said, "You must have done something wrong, because why would bad stuff, a lot of bad, really bad stuff happen to you, Job?" And then when Job is the chapter before this calling God out and saying, "I want you to stand up to me and face these questions I've been answering," that's when God makes an appearance. And as you can see from the very first verse of Job 38, it's inside of a raging storm. And so look at this conversation. It's a one-way conversation because God's doing the talking to Job. He never expected God to make a personal appearance. Then Yahweh, God's savior name, answered Job inside of a raging storm. "Who do you think you are? What do you know about my plans? You're blabbering away like you're an insider. Man up. Please analyze my planning process. But before you do, tell me, were you around when I made the world? You must have been. You know so much. Who decided how big the world would be? Of course, only you have all the insights." Sometimes educators tell us that being sarcastic, using sarcasm, isn't the best way to make your point. But here you see that's exactly what God's doing when he says, "You know so much." And he talks about Job being able to analyze God's planning process. He's making fun of Job. He's saying, "You don't really know anything." He's using sarcasm to make his point. Verse 5. "Who decided how big the world would be? Of course, only you have all the insights. It had to be you who came up with the blueprints. Who holds the world in place? Who built the whole thing from the ground up while all the angels I made stood and cheered? Who keeps the oceans where I put them? I poured them all out over the earth's surface. I was the one who dressed the oceans in misty clouds. I outfitted the seas in the dark fog up in the skies. I was the one who walled off all those waters. I kept the waves from trespassing the shores. In other words, it means that's why there's not going to be any more floods, like the Bible tells us right at the beginning in Genesis 6. There's 4 chapters about the global flood God sent that destroyed all human life except for those 8 people on board. And God promised at the end of that, he was never going to do anything like that again. I'm the one, verse 11, God says, who said, "This far, not any further. Your wild tantrums will stop where I say. So God's saying that he's the storm bringer and he's the storm stopper. He made everything. He's reminding us he controls it all. And for his people who depend on his promises about what Jesus did, he has some sort of benefit in mind with even the worst things that he allows into a human being's life. And that is a tremendous comfort for lots of people all over the world. That's 2 out of the 3 Bible sections. And then there's a third one. It's from the book of Acts. And this is right after Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. The book of Acts tells about the stuff Jesus did once he went back to heaven, how he controlled the situation. He made sure that his people spread the news about what he was, who he is, what he did, what he's doing now. And most of the book, a lot of it at the end, this, especially this section, is about the missionary Paul. He's one of the guys that Jesus selected once Jesus was back in heaven. He made a personal appearance from heaven to this Paul guy and made a believer in Jesus out of this guy who was really hated everything Jesus stood for. And then it tells about the missionary work that this Jewish guy in the Middle East did in countries like Turkey and over in Europe, in places like Greece, Albania, all kinds of places like that. But here he's arrested, and earlier in the chapter, and even the chapter before, you can kind of see how it doesn't look like he's got a shred of hope for his work to go on, because he's arrested and he makes a claim to the Supreme Court of the Roman Empire. Paul's a Roman citizen, so he has the right to a trial in front of the Roman emperor himself in Italy. And so that's where they take him. But it's going to be a voyage on a boat on the Mediterranean Ocean. And the Mediterranean Ocean has North Africa as one of its coasts, the Middle East, Turkey, and then all those European countries like Greece and Italy and Spain. So here they are. They've taken off from the Holy Land, and everything's going pretty normal when everything goes crazy. Take a look at this section. That's one we'll spend a little more time with. It says in verse 13, when a gentle breeze started blowing from the south, the sailors thought, this is the wind we wanted. Now it's here. They pulled the anchor up, and we sailed along the coast of Crete. It wasn't long before a hurricane, what sailors call a northeaster, roared down from the island and hit us on the ship. Now, these ships, and this ship in particular, the Bible tells us, held a cargo usually of grain from Africa to go to Italy, and that's where this ship was headed. And it also could carry passengers, paying passengers, and there were like over 270 paying passengers on board. The only thing you got to keep in mind here, this is in the days before cruise ships, so they didn't have staterooms, and there wasn't buffets. There was no bedding at all anywhere, no bathrooms even. You just have to do all your business off the deck. As far as food was concerned, you'd have to prepare it yourself somehow on little grills on the deck. And you'd also have to sleep on the deck unless you wanted to go below deck, but that wasn't a very good call either. It was dark and dismal down there with all the grain cargo. So verse 15, the ship was at the mercy of the storm. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind. So we gave up and let the wind carry us away. This has got to be an incredibly helpless feeling. Here's a map that might give you a little bit more of an idea about this island of Crete and all the stuff that occurred during this trip. Their wind that they wanted to take them over toward Italy was now out of control, and they didn't know where they were going to end up. They thought the wind might blow them all the way to the north shore of Africa over by Libya, something like that. So, verse 16, we got some shelter from the wind when we passed south of the little island of Cauda. You can see that on the map down in the bottom left. So we decided to pull in the ship's lifeboat, which we were towing along, but we had a hard time with that. Finally, we got the lifeboat where it belonged. Then the sailors wrapped ropes under the ship to hold it together. The sailors were afraid they'd hit the large sandbars off Libya's coast. That's how bad a storm this was. So they lowered the sail and let the wind take us. Next day, the storm was so fierce that the crew started throwing cargo overboard. They didn't want the ship to be so heavy that it would hit the shallow parts in the ocean near the North African shore. And then the ship would just tear apart from the wind howling it into the sand. And then they would be shipwrecked and maybe even drowned. The next day, verse 19, the third day, they even threw some of the ship's equipment over. For several days, we couldn't see the sun or the stars. The storm wouldn't let up. It was so severe, we finally began to lose hope of coming out of it alive. Since hardly anyone wanted to eat, Paul got the crew together and said, "Men, you should have followed my advice not to sail from Crete. You would have avoided all this disaster and loss. There's no need to dwell on that now. Cheer up. In the end, there isn't going to be any loss of life, but the ship is going to go down. I know this because last night I saw an angel from the God I belong to and serve." He's talking about the only real God, the God of the Bible. "And the angel told me, 'Don't be afraid, Paul. You are going to present your case to the emperor. You're going to make it to Rome. What's more, God's promised to save the lives of everyone sailing with you. So cheer up, men. I'm sure God's going to do everything exactly as he told me. But first, our ship is going to wreck on some island.'" This doesn't sound like a real hopeful Bible section, does it? It'll help to get an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about boats and ships. The first Bible reading for today, Jesus was in a boat with his fisherman buddies, and this is the kind of ship on Lake Galilee that they would use for this kind of commercial fishing. It'd be about as big as a UPS truck and smaller, though, than a school bus. When you get to this Bible reading we just had, and those people are sailing on a ship, not so much a boat, on a ship. And that kind of a ship, to better handle situations in the much larger ocean, would look a little something like this. And you can kind of see a comparison on the bottom between the ship on the ocean and the ship on Lake Galilee in the Holy Land. They're two completely different sizes. You'd think on a ship as big as the one on the ocean that you would be safe. You'd feel a lot safer. They made these ships bigger to hold as much cargo as possible so the owner could make as big a profit as he could when he got the ship to the harbor and could sell the stuff on board. But when these kind of hurricanes or typhoons took over, there wasn't much you could do. And so you remember from this Bible section how hopeless it looked. They brought the little lifeboat that they were towing behind. They brought that into the ship and tied it on the deck because otherwise the storm was going to ram the little lifeboat into the ship and possibly do some damage to the ship that would make it sink. They didn't want to sink in the ocean. The waves, even if they were good swimmers, were going to overpower them. They threw the cargo overboard. Now they have no hope for profit. And this whole venture on the Mediterranean Ocean is a complete waste of time and money for the owners and the crew, the people on board the ship, the 270 some people on board the ship as passengers that are camping on the deck of the ship would have no idea whether they were going to survive this thing. And it kind of helps to see a bigger picture of this whole situation. They start out over in the Holy Land, over here, where the red arrow starts. And then in Bible times, these ships would try to keep within reach of the shore. They didn't want to get too close to the shore in case, they'd smash into it. But they tried to stay along the shore in case some bad weather would come up, and then they could quick get to shore and tie the boat up and maybe be safe. But when they got over here to the island of Crete, they're heading over here to Italy. That's when everything went crazy and they were in danger of their ship going down and hitting this north shore of the country of Africa around Libya. And especially since they knew that there was some shallow areas out there in the ocean just north of Libya's north shore, they were terrified something was going to happen. So that's why they dumped all of the cargo overboard so they could be lighter and rise up higher so they wouldn't hit these sandbars. That's why they threw some of the heaviest equipment overboard. They didn't want any of that bad stuff to happen. These are big, tough sailor guys. They have a lot of experience on the sea. Their captain for sure does, but they have never seen anything like this before, and they cannot deal with it. They aren't even eating anymore because they're so worried and busy with trying to keep the ship from sinking, from hitting something, and all the people on board dying. They're worried now, not so much about making a profit. Now they're worried about surviving. They don't want to drown. They don't want to lose their lives. You saw in this Bible section that God sent a special message to this missionary Paul guy on this ship. He had an angel messenger come and he told him, this looks really bad, but I'm in control of everything. And one day you're going to be able to look back and you're going to be able to say, yeah, it was really horrifying at the time, but it turned out everything worked out okay, which is what we find a lot in our everyday lives. Crises come up. Some of them are pretty scary. We don't know whether we're going to survive, and we are just scared to death. But in the Bible, God gives us guarantees, not just promises, but guarantees where he staked his life on following through on these things, that in the end, everything is going to be okay, no matter how severe the situation looks, no matter how dire the circumstances appear to be. And so, just some thoughts to take away from today's Bible sections, and especially this last one. Knowing God is the only accurate way to learn about yourself. You might say, well, how can that be? In the Bible, God tells us all kinds of stuff. And some of the stuff he tells us is the truth about you and me, a truth that we do not want to face. It makes the news about Jesus appetizing news, because without knowing the truth about ourselves and knowing the truth about God, we have no hope. No, the Bible tells us that God has zero tolerance for any kind of foolishness on our part. And by foolishness, God defines any kind of wrongdoing or not doing the right thing when we should as sin, and something he guarantees that he has to punish. Jesus said one time, "You guys don't understand what I'm doing now, but someday you will." And he was talking to his prize students, the ones that he was training and who would be his link to people around the world after he went back to heaven. And he says, you guys don't even understand all the time. When you saw that first Bible section where his men were sure they were all going to die and that Jesus was going to die, they weren't remembering the stuff that he had told them was going to happen to him, that he was going to do. They didn't understand God's plan to rescue all people in the body of God the Son, the Jesus that they knew standing in front of them. They certainly didn't know what was going on when they were in that storm. They forgot everything, which is what panic does. It just kind of wipes our brain clean of even the slightest information we have from the Bible about what the facts of life are. So see, sin is not as simple as just doing wrongdoing, or failing to do the right thing. Sin is like a dye that discolors every cell of our being. It twists everything we think and say and do, and it turns it to being evil. And so God does us a public service when he explains the truth about himself, his zero tolerance policy regarding sin, and what he sees in every person, our dirty cells that want to twist everything the wrong way. So Jesus came, the Bible explains, to rescue fools from themselves. And when he gets to us in the Bible, he helps us come to an agreement that we are fools. We cannot rescue ourselves. We need outside assistance. And the assistance can't just be a little handout. It's got to be the whole thing. He's got to take care of everything. And there is no foolishness that we fools do that is more foolish than the sin that comes into our head, that lives inside of us and always wants to wipe our brains clean from everything we know God tells us is the truth about life, about ourselves, about him in the Bible. And in addition, there is no wisdom greater than knowing how God freed every single person from all their sins. This was a more amazing miracle than anything else Jesus ever did. It didn't look so amazing because it involved him living a normal human life. There didn't look like anything too amazing there. Working as a construction worker, and then later retiring from that when he was 30 and becoming a Jewish rabbi, a guy who would explain the Old Testament Bible, the only Bible they had, to Jewish people in their homeland there. But even though it didn't look like he was doing anything, with every second of his life, he was doing the opposite of what comes natural to you and me. He was doing the right thing, and he was avoiding the wrong thing. And everything he was doing, the Bible explains, we get credit for. And then at the end, when Jesus was on the cross, then he was serving the sentence everyone should suffer for all eternity. Look at him. Here he is in the boat, asleep on a cushion, while everybody else is pretty sure they're all going to die, submerged in the lake where no one can ever find their bodies. And everything, their dream, Jesus' mission is over. And they got to rescue Jesus from himself. But look at what Jesus is doing. The first Bible reading tells us he was asleep in the boat because he was unafraid. He knew even when he wasn't conscious, God was still taking care of him. God knew what was best for him, and he knows the same thing about us. And even when he's asleep in the boat, he is reversing all the charges God has against us and cleaning our record, putting his life in our place. And then those last 6 hours, he is in a bigger storm than we can ever imagine, bigger than the first Bible reading storm, bigger than that storm that Job was staring at when God was talking to him, bigger than this storm that the missionary Paul and the 270 other people on board that ship were facing. He's facing God's anger for every single human, every single one of their sins. This is what rescued you and me. And the Bible is God's note to us to tell us that means you. You are safe. I am safe, even though there isn't any way that we could deserve this or earn it or pretty it up at all with our lives of devotion to him. He did it all in our place, and that means we are safe. This is what those old school churches, those cathedrals, kind of look like. You see a little bit of a floor plan. And I want to focus you in right here in the middle of the inside of the church. They have a weird name for it. They call it a nave. It's the same word where we get our English word navy from. It means ship. And so the inside of churches, those old school cathedral type churches where the people sat, that they called the nave or the ship. And they wanted the people who worship to understand, no matter where you go, your life is at risk. And the only hope for you to be safe is in what God has said and done in our place. We're on the ship that Jesus is steering. We're on the ship that Jesus is controlling. And he tells us it might look very scary sometimes and be very dangerous, but in the end, we're going to be okay. So we keep trying to remind ourselves, and the Bible chips in and helps us. Our Christian support network chips in to help us remember that whatever is out of our control is not out of control. It's under your Father in heaven's control. He's the one that was in control on that big Lake Galilee when Jesus was asleep in the boat. And then he showed he was in control when they woke him up and he instantly stilled the storm. He could have made that storm do anything he wanted. He stopped the storm to show them that later on in your lives, when you're in some life-threatening situations, I want you to understand you're still safe. I got you. Don't worry and don't be afraid. This is really comforting for us because even when we're little kids, remember, we would be scared, especially when night fell. We were alone in our rooms. When it was dark or we're in a place we didn't know, we felt like we were all alone. But God reminds us in the Bible that because of what Jesus did in our place and God's ongoing love to bring us into his family of believers, people who depend on what Jesus did, and keeping us there, he's got his eye on us. He's paying attention, and everything is going to be okay. So whenever God allows something unpleasant, remember it is not a random thing. It's not something that gets away from God and surprises him and he's not able to handle it. It's not a random thing. He has a reason for allowing whatever transpires in our lives. And he wants us to depend on his words, and he wants us to help other people we see stumbling. He wants us to help other people who are frozen in fear and remind them about what the truth is so they don't let go of the news about Jesus, which is our default setting. We want to do that, but he says, hang on tight to me. I got a hold of you and I'm hanging on tight to you. In the same way, it didn't look like anybody had a hold of Jesus. God was caring for him and caring for us at the same time. God was seeing us on that cross and punishing us with our eternal life sentences. Jesus was feeling it so that we could be safe. And the problems and pain he brings into our lives now that he allows to happen, he's doing that so that we remember. We keep going back to his words and promises, not what everybody else tells us, to depend on what he did in our place. Let's close with a prayer. Father, we're grateful for the gift of words directly from you. The missionary got a message from an angel that told him that everything was okay, even though pandemonium was breaking out, panic was setting in, people didn't know where to turn. Your words brought them around and helped them hear the truth, even though they couldn't see the truth. So when we can't see an end in sight, help us remember you know what's best, that you're in control, that you gave us your very best in your son and rescued us. And so that's what we need. Cure the storm that rages inside of us. Keep us close to you and helping the people around us understand before it's too late and time runs out and our new life with you begins, that will be trouble-free and problem-free forever. We look forward to that and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
What they haven't eaten.
So we always end with a guarantee that he printed out in the Bible for us from God of his care, ongoing care, and his continuous love for us, no matter how bad we mess up. And so, once again, today, the Lord is blessing you all the time and protecting you constantly, too. The Lord's making his face smile on you, and he is being gracious to you, the opposite of what all of us deserve. The Lord is looking on you with his favor. He's paying attention, and he is giving you his peace. And so that's it for this week. I want to make sure to wish you a happy holiday today, the 4th of July.